Hi and welcome to another episode of Casted, our podcast at ITU about foundational questions of information technology. So information technology transforms lots of things in the world, but it also transforms disciplines in academia. For instance, transforming or modifying at least ethnography into something called digital ethnography. So here with me to talk about that is the person who actually literally wrote the book on this, Sarah Pink. Sarah, welcome to the podcast. So Sarah has been a leader of the Center of Digital Ethnography at Royal Institute, I can't get this right, at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology.
Yes, the Digital Ethnography Research Centre
the Digital
at the
Ethnography
Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Copenhagen and welcome to Casted.
Thank you very much.
So, and I guess basically I need an introduction both to ethnography and maybe then to digital ethnography and cyber ethnography or cyber anthropology. All of these things may be the same or not.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. So we'll start with ethnography. Ethnography is often described as a bundle of methods that are used to investigate people in parts of different societies and cultures. Ethnography literally means to write about people, but its literal use is really not necessarily strictly applied anymore when we talk about what ethnography does and what ethnographers do. So we might start thinking about ethnography as being a bundle of methods that involves watching what people do, asking people questions, participating in what people do. It can involve interviewing, it can involve actually going for walks with people, talking to people while they walk, but also now much of my own practice as an ethnographer as well, it involves video recording people, taking photographs of people, or asking them to record or photograph aspects of their life.
So the history here, this really goes back to something like 18th century Germany, where basically unemployed rich people travel to Africa and study people there, and then there's, I guess, some kind of transformational shift at the turn of the last century with Boas, who redefines both the method but also the objective, or maybe just the stance of ethnography.
Ethnography has evolved through a whole series of different approaches and stances and ways of theorizing what ethnography is seeking to find out and to look at in society. And that continues to happen. I guess my interest in much more is defining contemporary ethnography, which doesn't only mean ethnography of the contemporary, but it means a contemporary approach to ethnography. So for me, ethnography, as I define it, is an approach to researching with people, trying to understand their worlds, participating in their worlds. It doesn't involve studying people as if you are separate from them. It really involves studying people within a relationship with them. So actually participating and collaborating with them to produce new ways of understanding how they might feel about something, particular activities that they might do, and also the kinds of things that they would never usually talk about. So for me, ethnography is a core method for actually delving beneath the surface, trying to actually understand the things we would normally never see people doing in their everyday lives. For example, in some of my projects, we look at people's everyday morning routines, from when they wake up and get out of bed and what they do till they leave the house, or their bedtime routines, those parts of life you would never show to anybody else, but also those aspects of life that it would never occur to you to talk to other people about. So they might be very mundane, hidden aspects of your life. It might be how you actually know where things are in the dark. How do you find the light switch when you walk through your house in the dark? Something that you know when you live at home, but something you don't know when you go to a hotel or to somebody else's house.
So many of these things would not be volunteered in an interview, for instance.
Exactly. You could never find out the kind of things that we seek to reveal in ethnographic research, as I define it, by doing a quantitative survey or an interview. I really love ethnography to actually happen exactly in the place where the things that we're interested in finding out about occur. So, for example, when we do research about how people experience driving and how they feel about their cars and how they imagine their future cars and future autonomous driving cars, for example, we actually go in people's cars with them. We want to know what happens before they get in the car, so we follow them around their homes in the morning. We go in their cars with them, we sit next to them, and we actually watch what they're doing up to a point and video what they're doing as well. But really the most important thing is the dialogue that we have with people while they're doing the things that are most familiar to them in their lives.
That would require some delicacy, right? Because you're inserting yourself into the very moment that the observed behavior happens.
Yes. It's delicate in the sense that we're there with people in their lives as things happen. But we don't ask people to ever show us things that they wouldn't want to show us. So we're very careful to navigate those situations in such a way that we're actually not observing what people would do when we're not there. But we're actually collaborating with people to explore what they normally do when we're not there.
There's some kind of history using words like respect for the subject or something that permeates the ethics of ethnography.
Yes, and in this kind of process then, we actually ask people to share the aspects of their lives with us that they wish to share, they feel comfortable with sharing, but we also use their performance of things they would normally do as a way in which to help them to recall and remember and to think about things that they would never tell us or show us normally and that they were willing to talk about.
Is that the part you call reflexive, or this feedback that the observation itself generates, maybe not a change in behavior, but a change in reflection on part of the subject?
There's an element of reflecting on how our presence changes what people do. But within that, I would always recognise that as a researcher, I can only ever research people who are in a research situation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, they wouldn't know that I was there and it'd be a very different scenario. So I guess the idea is to understand what influence my presence has on the research situation, but also to recognise that essentially the research process is collaborative and that the people who participate in it are working with me.
Oh, collaborative between you as the investigator and the subject.
And the subject, yes. So we're working together to actually enable them to investigate their own experiences and to recall things and to find things in their experiences that I will help them to talk about through my questions.
So this is deliberately, is subjective a good word here?
Yes, it's very deliberately subjective, yes. And it deliberately seeks to understand from my perspective, so I need to try to understand what other people are experiencing. And I only have one core tool to use in that, which is my own experience of other things. So the idea is to actually also try to find ways in which to connect our own experiences to those of others, using forms of empathy, using forms of imagination. Of course, we can never know what it's like to be somebody else and to be in the situation the other person is in. But we try to, absolutely. But we try to get close in the most loyal and respectful way, so that we can then try to be able to actually write about their experience in such a way that we can communicate it to others.
Okay, loyal and respectful, I like that word. So in particular, you assume that the subject is a valid source of information about the subject.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So the digital part, so software could still mean two things for me, right? It could be that you study the relationship of the subject, many things actually, with other people in a digital world, because I assume that I know that some of the things you study are relationships, and they are now mediated by and certainly informed by digital technology, and then the subject interacts with technology. Mm-hmm. But it could also mean that digital ethnography is good old-fashioned ethnography using digital methods.
Yes, there are two aspects of it.
Both are true enough, or?
There are probably more, but the underpinning those two aspects of digital ethnography is the fundamental assumption that we now live in a context where the digital and the material are actually part of the same environments. So the digital material are brought together to the extent where we can't say that we're doing an ethnography that's not digital.
Because for most people...
Yeah, so underpinning that, we're accounting for the fact that our environments are always digital to some degree. Now. Yes. So you couldn't have done a digital ethnography before there were digital technologies. So that means that our modes of doing research, so our research methods and our practices, inevitably have a digital element. The way we write ethnography has a digital element, has done for a long time, because we write it on using our computers, our laptops, or our desktops.
The way we already there, it's interesting, because that, I guess, also has exploded, that it's not only sequences of letters. You communicate in many other ways now.
Absolutely. We disseminate our ethnography digitally. And not just because we publish it in journals that have online components. We use social media, we develop websites, all new modes of actually communicating about ethnography. So the world that we work in as ethnographers is a world that is inherently digital. And this also means that we use digital technologies as modes of doing our research. So we use digital video, digital photography, digital audio recording, and that means we can share our videos as soon as we've made them. So if I was, for example, doing a piece of research with you about how you drink your tea, and we sit there and you drink your tea and I interrogate you about how you experience your tea and how you think about the taste and how you experience your last cup of tea, and I ask you all these bizarre questions, and you think, this is woman totally crazy.
If because it should have been about coffee.
Yes. Of course. and then once we've finished, I'll say, okay, look, I want you to watch the video because I want you to be happy and I want you to be sure that the way that you've been portrayed in this is appropriate and that you've communicated what you want to communicate. So I say, well, look, I'll just upload the video and I'll send it to you straight away on my smartphone, and you can receive it on your smartphone and check through it, and then you can tag anything you don't like, or you can edit it even and send back to me what you would like me to use in my research. And then I'll ask you, well, now you've viewed your video, would you be happy for me to keep it in my research archive and analyze it? Would you be happy for me to use stills from it? Or would you be happy for me to show in presentations, or can I put it on my website as part of my research findings dissemination? And so those processes of actually engaging with people immediately and ongoingly in this research process have been really facilitated in fantastic ways by the way we can use digital technologies in the research process. There are many, many other possible examples of the ways we might share or communicate with people in research, first on a face-to-face basis, but then we might extend it into that more online basis by exchanging materials and sharing. So that's one way that we would use digital technologies.
So here's one way then,
research.
it seems to be that you're deliberately not doing the following: equip a home with lots of cameras and sensors.
No.
And measure the behavior of 10,000 people in Singapore.
I would be very happy to do research with other researchers who do that and then collaborate with them, but there are different ways of looking at the world.
Sure.
So
this is why we're here. This is exactly what. So who would do what I just described? Who would do an objective, large data, immersive is not the right word, but ongoing 24/7 data collection of how often the coffee machine is actually used on a Sunday?
It might be people who are interested in human-computer interaction. Research in that area. It might be psychologists, it might be social psychologists who might do a very, very micro-analysis of all the actions and things that are said in those processes. Or it might be sociologists who are interested also in documenting those activities. I'd be really fascinated by their results. And I love to work in big teams where different people do different types of research. One project I worked on actually involved energy engineers developing new ways of monitoring and measuring energy use and measuring all of those things in people's homes. Now, what we did in that project, though, was to follow people around their homes with video cameras. And the difference for me is the looking from above and mapping out and the moving through. And I think this has a really interesting parallel if you think about the way that human geographers work. Human geographers are often very critical of maps, of mapping. Because mapping flattens things. Mapping takes a slice across the world, looks at it from above.
As opposed to the normal geographers who love that. Okay, with the strength and emphasis on human geographers.
And then you think about movement, and the emphasis on movement in human geography. The idea of movement is about going through. And I really like that difference between the work that I do and the work that people who map out and measure and document in the other way do, because moving through enables us to actually understand life as it progresses through the paths that life takes and how it meanders through environments. And I think it's very important then to understand what happens when people start to move through an environment. What do they pick up? What do they feel? What do they sense? How does that actually feel like? We spend all of our lives moving through the world. We experience the weather, we experience the ground under our feet. We use digital technologies as we move through. We might take our smartphone and we might be using Google Maps when we're moving through a physical environment, or we might be taking pictures of what we've seen and uploading them to Instagram. So this idea that we move through environments in which the digital and the material are all part of the same configuration, and we're actually moving and weaving through those different aspects of our lives, really, for me, informs the whole question of how we can go about understanding what it feels like to be in the world.
So as far as I understand, at least classically, location or embodiment are important aspects of
Yes.
ethnography.
Yes, yes.
And so are there new concepts I can use to... It seems to me that we know both are physically present somewhere,
Yes.
but at least many of us are also digitally present somewhere else, maybe
Yes,
only for
yes.
glimpses of time, and
Yeah.
that maintain several, I don't know, instances of me on somebody else's phone that is updated every few seconds.
Yeah.
How do I reason about this? Are we now in several places at the same time? How do the concepts of location or embodiment or interacting with the world, how can I express this now?
We're still feeling, knowing, sensing beings who are continually engaging with our immediate environments. But digital technologies enable that to become interwoven with different forms of presence and different forms of connection, which again involve different ways of understanding and feeling and sensing the environments that we're in. So if you're walking through the street outside, where it's probably going to be a little bit cold, it's a little bit dark, and you're feeling particular things as you're going through that environment, and you're talking to somebody else on your smartphone, then you're bringing into that particular configuration that you're experiencing at the moment, a particular form of presence, and also particular forms of emotions and feelings that then become configured in relation to all of the other things that you're sensing and feeling at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think I get the... So ethnography here, at least in the way you explained it to me, is very much a method that can be used as a tool in disciplines such as sociology or human-computer interaction.
Yes.
And I guess classically anthropology, right?
Geography.
Is anthropology just... Is there anything else in anthropology? Oh, of course. Okay, anthropology is split into cultural anthropology and physical anthropology?
Well, in some iterations of anthropology, there are 4 fields. In the United States, 4-field anthropology is still quite dominant, which would be social, cultural, physical, and biological. Mm-hmm. But I think that might be the physical one. No, there's another one. Mm-hmm. But obviously, I don't practice that kind of anthropology, which is why I can't even roll off my tongue the 4 fields. So I was trained in social anthropology in the UK. And that, for me, is the core of my kind of practice as an anthropologist. But I guess my work has also gone much further than anthropology since my career started. And I've collaborated with many different disciplines. And I think that brings me back to one of the other core questions around ethnography, which is where we started. And I'd like to come back to ethnography for a moment now, because, yes, ethnography was developed in anthropology. There's a strong tradition of ethnography and anthropology, which are very much defined by anthropological principles and questions that anthropologists are interested in. But there has also, in parallel or in relation, been a strong core of ethnography and sociology, which has been slightly differently defined and developed. But as well, there has been much ethnographic practice developed in design and design research. So researchers and scholars in all of those disciplines actually think that ethnography belongs to them, and that they are actually the discipline that does ethnography and that knows how to do ethnography. Now, that's one of the reasons why the digital ethnography book that you referred to is called Digital Ethnography. It was actually written by a group of researchers coming from different disciplines, and which included anthropology, cultural studies, and media studies. And in the book, we consciously didn't want to define ethnography as being just belonging to one discipline. We very consciously wanted to represent an ethnography that could actually be changed by the way that it was shaped by the disciplines within which it was being used at the time. So there was always a different inflection in the way that ethnography is practiced in relation to the academic and scholarly discipline and its theories that inform the particular project it's used in.
So the book is very much structured on, I don't know, domain, right? There's a chapter on things, a chapter on relations, a chapter on oh my God, events and so on. And so these chapters, do they map onto disciplines, or am I being overly naive now again?
No, they don't. Maybe some of them are influenced more by different disciplines than others, but we actually have tried in each chapter to represent different disciplinary interpretations. Of course, some disciplines focus more on particular concepts, so there would sometimes be some dominance, but no, because we worked as an interdisciplinary team, then the aim was to actually write about, for example, relationships from perspectives that encompassed anthropological approaches to relationships, more sociological and cultural and media studies approaches to relationships, and also then to enable the readers and the users of the book to actually use our work as a way of actually thinking about, well, how would they, from their own disciplinary perspective, approach those questions as a digital ethnographer. So we wanted to provide a set of concepts and a set of methods and a methodological framework through which people could think about doing digital ethnography, but we didn't want to define how they should do digital ethnography or what they should do. I mean, I'm a strong believer that any book about research approaches and methods should be used by its readers, not followed. And it should be used to inspire, to enable them to think about what they want to do in their own work. Methods never finish when they're written down.
And
methods
I guess also
always
there's
ongoingly developing and changing.
It seems to me there's a strong tradition of not being dogmatic in exactly
Absolutely.
those questions in
Yes,
ethnography.
yes, yeah. Yes, we chose those concepts because they seem to address a range of different questions across a range of different scales, which we thought would be helpful.
And there are very nice cases
to
in each
use.
of them.
Yes.
Were wonderful. So let me get back to relations, because maybe we could just have an example to be a bit more concrete about this, because now I've been learning everything about methods and disciplines. So for instance, the way that the technology changes relations between people, I guess a lot by the mobile phone. So the mobile phone, which is enormously popular, in particular in maybe the southern part of the globe, which has really transformed many people's life, for better or for worse, and both basically destroying some structures and also some structures in how people communicate socially, but also reinforcing them.
Yes.
That was fascinating. That this object works and seems to work everywhere and seems to be a really important part of people's life. Which I was probably the last person in Scandinavia who got a mobile phone, so to me this is alien.
Yes,
but,
I think people use mobile smartphones in very culturally specific ways, and as part of the social relationships that are already existing in their worlds. They make new forms of social relationship possible. But I think the important thing is to actually start to think about how they become embedded in the way that the social structures and the social relationships that people already have, and how they actually enable people to maybe do new things within the structures of those relationships, but also how they support the maintenance of those relationships as well.
Can you give an example?
One of the projects that we've been working on in Australia, which is called Locating the Mobile, it's an Australia Research Council funded project, looked at how people use smartphones in families and in intergenerational families. And one of the interesting things there was looked at how people use them as modes of coordinating travel, caring for people, ensuring that people were okay, following and tracing where people were as a way of caring, not as a mode of surveillance.
But that also exists. In some societies, mobile phones very much become a method of control instead.
Yes. But those are probably societies where there were already methods of control in place. So I guess the very interesting thing about our research was actually to learn about how the smartphone became integrated in enabling people to carry out modes of living together, which actually enabled the feelings and the processes and the relationships which they sought to have and which they already had. Obviously, there are ways in which there are differences because the technology enables different modes of relating to people. It enables people to contact each other at different times. Your communications with people don't have to be synced in the same moment. You can leave a message and then you can get one later. But you could already do that with the answer phone. So we can actually see relationships between the way that
was
different
that used to the
technologies
same
have
degree? I mean, I never used an answer phone.
Oh, I think people certainly use answer phones to leave
But
messages for each other, yes.
So, so this is. So I understand that this is a that you want to study how people who are alive right now use technology that exists right now.
Yes.
But what would be interesting is, of course, to sort of use this as a starting point to reason about future technologies or emerging technologies.
Yes, and that's exactly what we've been doing in our research, looking at autonomous driving vehicles and also looking at how people use smartphones in the present and how they combine them with other technologies to get a sense of how some technologies are already being brought together in relationship to each other, which should be able to give us some clues about what kinds of technologies people might need to use in the future.
So self-driving cars are a popular theme here at the podcast. I think we have at least 2 or 3 conversations
really,
about
sure.
philosophy, artificial intelligence. The trolley problems are one of the eternal sources of interesting conversations. So, how does an ethnographer reason about that?
About the ethics of self-driving
For instance, if that's
cars.
even a topic.
Yes, I think my starting point for thinking about if our cars are going to kill us or who they're going to decide to kill in an accident scenario. My starting point would actually be to start thinking about what people will already have been doing to their cars before we arrive at the accident scenario. So how will people be using their cars already? Have people always customized their cars? Will people actually hack into their cars to see if they can actually determine what the car will do in an accident scenario itself?
So seeing that people actually happily modify their phones or all kind and personalize, I guess, personalize their phones a lot.
Yeah, of course.
We might be mistaken in assuming that the autonomous car that leaves the factory floor is actually the autonomous car that is going to be involved in an accident, because it might have been personalized.
Yes.
Including hacking, software hacking?
Yeah,
I don't know. I would
maybe.
do that.
I can imagine a whole small hidden industry growing up.
Changing my perfectly utilitarian car into which somebody has built in consequential ethics, but hacking it so that it's actually some kind of Nietzsche car that protects me instead of everybody else.
But think about mobile phones. When people used to want to break into their phones so that they could use them with other SIMs or in other countries.
Right. There's a strong tradition of this.
So I think the mobile phone is a fantastic technology to look at, or the smartphone is a fantastic technology to look at if we want to think about what people are going to do with the next emerging technologies.
And in particular, the way they sort of hack the intended use?
Yes, absolutely.
I see. Okay, so, and from studying this, we might... Would I make a moral mistake now by saying that we try to form hypotheses? Because now I seem to be stuck in a non-ethnographic view again.
Ethnographers don't like hypotheses.
I was.
But I think ethnographers ask questions.
They ask questions.
And I'm almost hypothesizing by saying, well, we know this about mobile phones, maybe people will do this with autonomous driving vehicles. I think it's one of the questions that we might want to ask ourselves in relation to what people would do with autonomous driving vehicles.
I guess the insight that the car that leaves the factory floor is not the car that's involved in the accident is pretty good already.
Yeah, and it will be fascinating to actually know how that pans out. The other point, though, is that the car that's on the road will not be on the roads that we can imagine or experience at the moment, because if the car that's on the road is not on the roads for another 10 or 15 years' time, then again, it will actually be going into a scenario that we actually don't know enough about, because we don't really know what the world's going to be like in 10 or 15 years' time. No. We have an idea. Many of our hunches might be right, but there needs to be, we need to acknowledge that we really actually don't know what's going to happen next, and our futures are really characterised by an enormous amount of uncertainty.
But this is what we want to reason about, right? We want to sort of have some kind of ownership into which direction this all is going.
Of course, we need to. We always need to feel that we can do something to feel less uncertain and to feel confident enough about what's going to happen next, to be able to feel comfortable.
I see. Mm-hmm.
That's why we spend so much time talking about questions about if autonomous driving cars are going to kill us, and what benefits they're going to bring to society.
In order to what? Construct acceptance? No, that can't be it.
No,
it must be
in order to be able to feel comfortable about the question of what's going to happen next, and how they will become part of our worlds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So do these findings aspire to influence the design of this technology? Or do they just want to talk about it, inform the conversation about this? Or what would be the least aggressive way of putting this? I guess these are observational studies that I could sort of see a chain in the academic disciplines that starting from an observational, highly subjective study, you might be inspired to do a controlled study, and then sooner or later the economists and the endocrinologists and the neuroscientists come in there as well, and then you have this fascinating and broad spectrum of various aspects of the same technology that you want to reason about. Possibly to make it better or more useful or more fair? I actually
believe that anthropologists should be trying to intervene at all levels. I believe that anthropology has a really significant role to play in society that hasn't been fully realised. But to be able to play that role, then anthropology has to change and be open to other disciplines. But I believe that the kinds of insights that we can produce through these studies should be having some influence at policy level. They should also be influencing technology design. And they should also be disseminated as a form of public scholarship that actually enables different sectors of the public with different interests to be able to actually rethink how they might be engaging with technologies as futures progress.
So that I really like that. So, but you say
also we should be engaging with other academics, of course, because we need to influence academic debates.
This is why we're here. So I like that even more. And you say anthropology. Well, there's certainly in anthropology is a history or tradition for activism. Is that the right word?
Yes, there are
for
forms
criticism.
of activism. Yes.
Going back to Boas, certainly, right? So that's not alien to anthropology. Or maybe it's just that the anthropologist is also an activist, but the anthropological research is still descriptive. Or
anthropological research can also take an activist mode. It can collaborate with an activist movement, for example. It can be done in collaboration and can feed insights and contribute to the aims of a movement as well. I think that at the moment one of the most interesting modes of engagement beyond the discipline of anthropology that anthropologists have been participating in has been the development of design anthropology.
Design anthropology.
Yes. So design anthropology brings together anthropology and design in such a way that it goes beyond what each of those disciplines can do individually, but it also means that both anthropologists and designers have to let go a little bit of some of their own core principles in order to accept the methods and approaches of the other discipline.
So what does design here mean? As an academic discipline or as the people, maybe that's the same?
It could be designers or design researchers, and designers and design researchers are actually sometimes the same people. So design researchers also design. And I would place design anthropology, I guess, more at that nexus between anthropological researchers and theorists and design researchers and practitioners, so that to be able to engage fully, the people involved need to be able to bridge the theoretical and the methodological and the practice-based dimensions of the relationships between those those disciplines. But that doesn't mean that it needs to be two people. It means that there might be a group of different people who all have different levels of engagement with theory, methodology and practice across the disciplines all working together.
Oh, and practice again here as an academic, as the study of practice?
Practice here...
Schatzky?
No, here practice very much in terms of what design practice and ethnographic practice is. So actually thinking of the work that a designer would do as a practice.
I see.
And the work, but similarly, trying to then, to correspond with that, define the work that an ethnographer would do as a practice as well.
So it's not so much an anthropology of design, it's some kind of interaction between, oh my God, between actually designing something and communicating with an anthropologist who studies the context in which the design is being used?
Yes. And you can weave between the disciplines in different ways in terms of the collaborations, but the main aspect of the research that would try to understand what other people are doing would be anthropological. But remember that designers also have really interesting techniques for learning about what people do and how people feel about things that they've already for many years been using to inform design.
So this I only know from the computer science perspective, as in human-computer interaction. Is that good enough a model for design, or should I think of engineers building bridges, or what should I think of?
I think you need to think more about participatory design. And
okay,
co-design.
that I know as well.
So participatory design and the way that participatory designers can work with anthropologists is I think is really interesting.
So this would be the school of software development that, for instance, the school of software development that constructs new applications by interacting with the intended users of the application.
It could be that, but it could go further than that. So it could actually think about participatory design as a designer working with a community or a group of people to together design a service or a process or an object, and it can cross over also to service design. So that's where anthropologists and designers can really come together and bring different elements to this process. Now, the interesting thing about designers is they've never had any fear or worry about the future. That's what design is about, doing things that go into what happens next. Whereas anthropologists have always very much held back and always only researched what's already happened.
Oh, so the critical component is sort of missing from design, or am I being too brutal now?
I think that's a bit too brutal. I think that we need to think about design as having a critical component in terms of its critique of social structures, its potential critique as design activism, and but its ability to actually confront the idea that we can work in a temporality that we don't know anything about yet, which is what's going to happen next, which is what anthropologists have always worked in the past, because what anthropologists study has always already happened. What ethnography writes about is always the past.
Or maybe the now, but...
Well, no, because the problem with the now is that the ethnographic present, as it has been called, is something that's actually being condemned by anthropologists as being ethically problematic, because it objectifies people and crystallises them into a fixed moment in the present. And it means that we can't recognise the ongoing processes of change that people are going through. Yeah,
this makes a lot of sense. Thank you for I mean, thank you for all those words. I'm learning a lot.
But the thing is that that focus on the past then has been the ethical refuge of anthropology. It's been the way we've actually enabled ourselves to be reassured that our work is ethical. So when we're confronted with the question of researching the future, then it opens up a whole series of new questions, which can be interrogated ethically. And also in terms of an ethics of responsibility, of actually assuming the burden of responsibility, not only of writing about people who've done things in the past, but assuming the burden of responsibility of considering how to represent possible futures and the ethics of describing futures that may be utopian or dystopian.
Is there some ethical tradition that you think anthropology is more wed to than another one?
Yes, specifically to the ethics of collaboration, of acknowledgement, of respect to the people who participate in our research,
power,
of enabling them to also take shared responsibility with us for what we reveal and what we don't reveal, ethics of consultation. Yes. So when we're writing about people's futures that those people haven't yet experienced or lived, we might create those futures collaboratively with them. So we would consider with them what it's appropriate to communicate and not to communicate.
Okay, very good. So the source of information about the future is, among many other things, collaboration with people who live now and report their own experiences with things that we may want to extrapolate from. No, that's too much. We try to observe what happens now, and take seriously the self-reported vision of a future of the subject.
Yes, that's one mode of investigation, to actually collaborate with people in the future, to use their experience of the future almost as probes through which they can help them to imagine different futures, and to do that in conversation. The other way is through workshop methods, which comes much closer to design research methods. So one of the projects that I've developed at RMIT over the last few years, and we're actually publishing a book this month, I think, or next month, very soon, called Uncertainty and Possibility. Oh. And that's a book that I've written with, based on a series of workshops that I developed with my colleague Yoko Akama, who's one of the other authors. And those workshops specifically aimed to create modes of uncertainty that people in the workshop would experience, so we could then harness those feelings of uncertainty in order to develop visions or versions or ideas of possible futures that would be different from the present.
Some of them, I guess, very scary, and some of them utopian. And
yeah, none of them were very scary, but some of them were a bit sci-fi.
That's scary enough. No, but we have had guests as well on the podcast where we reason about existential future risks.
Yes,
and those seem to be very, very hard to reason about clearly.
Yes.
Whoa! So this sounds as if that project would be quite transformative for anthropology, because it requires a redefinition of the self-image of what the maybe not the goal, but certainly the method of the study is. Yes,
and it involves using new methods of doing research. But what we've tried to do, again, I talked about bringing together anthropological and design practice. What we've also sought to do in the workshops is to develop what I've called blended practice, which has meant that we've developed the workshops very much in the tradition of design futures or design workshops, but we've also used video recording to. Now there's a tradition of video documentation in design research, and designers document their workshops in many ways and create marvelous resources of materials. But we've tried to actually combine that much more with ethnographic or visual ethnographic.
But you speak with some authority there as well, right? About visual ethnography and sensory ethnography and so on.
Yes, so we've tried to apply some of the methods from visual and sensory ethnography to the way in which we document the workshops. And so then essentially we've tried to bring together them design research and visual anthropology or ethnographic research practice into the same process, so that we can try to actually start to produce the materials differently and blend our practice actually in the very moments of making the knowledge that we're producing.
What does blended mean here?
For me, blended means creating a mode of researching that brings together one discipline with another discipline, but is not one or the other. So it's not a version of design that has some anthropology in it. It's not a version of anthropology that has some design in it. It's actually something that brings those two approaches together in a new way, which is challenging. It hasn't been an easy process sometimes, because I'm obviously inevitably pulled towards my own discipline and wish to make my judgments and my analysis from that perspective. So it's also an interesting process of being pulled back when you're going too far into your own discipline. And
is there a lot of pushback, because you must be challenging other people's disciplinary security a lot by interacting across these disciplines with
in
many
this particular project, I think we all went into the project wishing to be challenged. And wanting to open up our own practice to other modes of practice and to learn from that process. And to do something different in terms of approaching the question of uncertainty and possibility.
But I guess it requires some kind of mutual agreement that this is a good idea, that basically stepping out of these disciplinary boundaries is good, because we all feel very, very much at home in the methods that we know. And
but often also I find that people acknowledge the limits of their own disciplines, and they're keen to actually push outside them to explore what they can learn by engaging with new disciplines. And I think in my own case, because much of my work is methodological and I engage with people from many different disciplines ranging from engineering to design to arts practice, filmmaking, safety research, health research, and probably other things that I can't remember, including, of course, the emerging technologies research I'm involved in as well. And very often we forge those connections because we're always aware of what we can learn from each other and how we can actually push our own thinking in new ways. The thinking that I've done in our uncertainty and possibility research that I just spoke about has been very influenced by the research I've done about safety.
So is this, are we back at the cars now with safety? Or?
No, we're back at construction site. We're back on, we're on construction sites, logistics workers and nurses and occupational therapists who go and visit other people in their homes to care for them.
Oh man. And from there you get to uncertainty, because safety is basically a question about controlling uncertainty?
We looked at occupational worker health and safety, which is essentially an anticipatory regulatory framework that seeks to mitigate the possibility of anything unsafe happening by imposing a series of guidelines and practices upon people who actually, in reality, improvise just like the people who drive their cars, and have to sometimes hack the system so that they can actually work in a way that's really safe. I know a bunch of good examples for this. Many.
I guess what I really like about this entire tradition is the focus on people personalizing, changing, playing around with, toying with all these artifacts. So the playfulness of all of this, including sometimes even the mode of presentation, is really highly inspiring. Sarah, thank you very much for coming. I got a lot out of this. I now feel moderately better informed about what this is. Thanks a lot for coming.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for tuning in.